Welcome to another Silicon Bites. Before we get into it, thank you to everybody who has helped support the channel recently through Buy Me a Coffee or Patreon, and especially to those who've been helping to fund the documentary film project that we want to make in Ukraine, the crew that we want to send into the country to create a highly impactful film, especially that will be able to compete in festivals against Russian propaganda films, such as the Russians at War, a disgraceful piece of propaganda, which is unfortunately still being played in film festivals and even universities across Europe and around the world. In this episode, we're going to talk about a difficult, possibly even uncomfortable subject, and that is how Ukraine is perfecting the meat grinder, the grinder of metal and Russian troops on the eastern and southern fronts. A new commander has been appointed to the eastern front lines of Ukraine, and according to Euro Maidan Press, is bringing about a transformation of the performance of Ukraine's armed forces. General Mykhailo Drapatyi has overseen an increase in combat effectiveness in the Kharkiv, Luhansk, and Donetsk directions that is crippling Russian artillery and armour. Ukrainian forces are shattering Russian artillery in record-breaking numbers, according to reports, countering Russia's rumoured plans for a massive offensive in the Borova-Lyman sector. General Drapatyi commands the 3rd Assault Corps and has built a ferocious defensive line that is stopping Russian forces as well as assembling an elite force. Human and material losses on a phenomenal scale will be the reality for any major Russian offensive plans in 2025. But Russian plans seem not to be modified by the toll in human suffering, human injury, human cost. Their goal is thought to be to advance to the Oskil River and eliminate a major Ukrainian bridgehead there. Intelligence suggests they are mobilizing a massive number of troops and equipment in this sector, aiming to establish a significant numerical superiority over the Ukrainian defenders. Russian offensive planning typically relies on massive artillery barrages to pave the way for mechanized and infantry assaults. But the Ukrainians have prioritized destroying Russian artillery, and their expert drone teams are becoming ever more adept at attriting Russian armor and weaponry. They will aim to disrupt Russian preparations by preventing them from conducting large preparatory barrages. With the sheer intensity of monitoring drones over the skies in key sectors of the battlefield, concealment is difficult even in rear areas, and especially for any mass formations of men and equipment. Russian artillery is positioned typically 12 to 15 kilometers behind the front lines, but this is well within the reach of observation drones, bomber drones, and especially fly-by-wire fiber optic drones, which now have ranges that exceed 50 kilometers. Russian towed artillery guns are constrained to emplacements with heavy concealment, such as forest strips along the Krasna River. Ukrainian drone operators can use constraining factors such as woods, hills, and escarpments to make well-educated estimates of Russian firing positions. They intensify drone reconnaissance and they destroy targets. Russians often follow their artillery doctrine, writes Euro Maidan Press, which says to relocate only after coming under fire. It's an inflexible approach that only compounds their losses, as accurate Ukrainian drone strikes often only need one hit to disable or to destroy the enemy gun. Indeed, Ukraine destroyed 1,644 Russian artillery pieces and mortars in March alone, over 3 times the monthly average of the previous 2 years. Ukrainians can force the Russians to increasingly relocate and conceal their heavy guns. This weakens the effectiveness of Russian fire support. According to the theory expounded by Euromaidan Press, there has been a sharp rise in Ukrainian combat effectiveness along the Eastern Front, which is closely tied to General Mykhailo Drapatyi's appointment as commander of the Khortysia operational strategic group. Since Drapatyi took command, Ukrainian forces have improved both their defensive coordination and battlefield resilience. This has led to a significant increase in Russian losses and, of course, operational costs. Before March, Russians required 17 assaults to take 1 square kilometre, more than double of what it was before. By March, this had soared to 36 attacks per square kilometre. The additional costs in men and resources rise in proportion to the number of assaults required to take a target area. Defence of this sector was significantly bolstered by the new 3rd Army Corps, formed from the Ukrainian 3rd Assault Brigade. Expanding it to an entire Army Corps has created the space for greater operational autonomy and access to advanced engineering resources, especially in the construction of built fortifications. At the heart of the Corps is the 3rd Assault Brigade. This is becoming a model or a template for other battalions to follow for a well-trained, disciplined and highly motivated unit. This improved organisational capacity and leadership hierarchy allows for better NATO-style tactics and training. Other brigades being incorporated into the unit can be trained and reorganised to match the combat effectiveness of the 3rd Assault Brigade. And in the unique environment of Ukraine's resilience and civil society mobilisation, the Corps uses social media to attract thousands of Ukrainian and foreign volunteers. Estimates suggest between 1,000 and 2,000 new recruits are brought on board each month for that battalion alone, significantly bolstering their numbers ahead of the Russian summer offensive and tackling what had been a persistent recruitment issue for Ukraine in 2024. Now the tables seem to have turned, and it's thought Russia won't be able to afford troops in Ukraine past 2026 as its economy struggles. It's ironic that Trump is trying to end the war in Moscow's favour, at the point where it seems the balance of advantage is swinging towards Ukraine. Well, perhaps that is no accident. The New York Post reports that Russia could be forced to end the war in Ukraine because it will run out of money to pay its troops. This is according to experts at the Washington, D.C.-based Institute for the Study of War. Russia has burnt through at least half of its $106 billion liquid sovereign wealth fund, which is used to top up the budget and pay troops' salaries as well as new recruits' bonuses. At the current pace, Moscow may only be able to afford another 12 to 16 months of fighting. 30,000 to 45,000 Russian troops are killed or injured in Ukraine every month on a near monthly basis, estimates the ISW's Russia team lead George Barros. He says the system for generating fighters worked for 2.5 years, but it's starting to fail. Russia is constrained by the laws of economics, scarce resources, and there isn't an endless manpower resource in Russia. Troop salaries and recruiting bonuses are ballooning amid high inflation rates, according to the Russian Finance Ministry's own data. This gives the US incredible leverage to find a solution to end the war, leverage which Trump has either not understood or chosen not to act upon. The United States can use the enormous challenges Russia will face in 2025 as leverage to secure critical concessions in ongoing negotiations to end the war by continuing and even expanding military support to Ukraine, writes ISW's Christina Harwood in a recent report. Ukraine, with Western aid, can accelerate the timeline on which Putin feels the strain on the Russian economy and military, forcing Putin to face hard choices sooner than he would like, Harwood wrote. The United States should call Putin's bluff and force him to pay the costs of the war for which he has mortgaged Russia's future. This is interesting. Of course, we criticize Trump for things he says. We criticize him for his statements, especially towards Russia, normalizing and excusing their aggression. But what we should really be calling out is his failure to pull all of these levers that are actually at his disposal, which could force Putin to end the war. And he's choosing not to do that. Russian troops are largely not motivated by values of patriotism or defense of family, which is suggested by multiple reports, but also anecdotally in the highly insightful interviews of POWs conducted by the Ukrainian journalist Zolkin. Many are fighting for money and the promise of huge payouts in the event of their deaths. Unlike Ukrainians who have clear motivations to fight, Russia is a nation of reluctant warriors, which has meant Russia has had to pile on signing bonuses for new recruits. It seems to us that the Russians are not going to be able to recruit enough replacements per month, Barros said. They're either going to have to up the prices after that shrinking demographic of untapped troops, or the money is going to be a constraint, at which point it will have to face hard decisions about doing another round of mobilization. Moscow has been forced to offer increasingly higher incentive bonuses to attract new troops, despite inflation rates in Russia of more than 10%. Well, that's the official rate, though the real inflation rate is thought to be somewhere between 20 and 30%. Russia's protracted war and high losses on the battlefield are already causing major economic issues in Russia, and these economic problems will likely mature within another 12 to 18 months, Harwood wrote in that same ISW report. Russia's current reported monthly recruitment rate is either just equal to or just below the quantity needed to replace Russia's monthly casualty rate, 1-to-1, Harwood wrote. But in December and January, according to the latest data, Russia lost more than 48,000 troops. Moscow is currently suffering upwards of 1,200 casualties per day, a rate that began to increase late last year as Russian forces made gradual, creeping advances in eastern Ukraine. This is, again, according to the ISW report. Dozens of Russian troops captured by Ukrainians were interviewed. Very few mentioned joining out of a sincere patriotic duty, and none could communicate a reason for the war, a reason of why they were fighting. Moscow is increasingly reliant on foreign troops, such as North Korea, which sent up to 12,000 soldiers to fight in 2024, it's estimated. Ukraine also discovered more than 150 Chinese citizens serving in the Russian military. And anecdotally, recruitment for the Russian army is widely taking place across the African continent, where payouts in the event of death represent undreamt of fortunes for many in rural areas and living in relative poverty in many African nations. Corrupt and ineffective governments in countries such as Cameroon seem not able to push back against Moscow and not prevent the recruitment in towns and villages for Russia's suicide army. Ukraine, however, is increasingly relying on modern, life-preserving military technology and a rapid evolution of drone warfare instead of Russia's Soviet-era systems. This suggests that Ukraine is achieving an average loss rate of 1 casualty per 4 Russian losses. This is the average, but dedicated drone battalions are likely achieving far better survival ratios even than this. Well, let me tell you a story that illustrates this transformation in the effectiveness of Ukrainian troops and the evolution of drone warfare, that is, remote attritional warfare, which Ukraine has the edge over Russia on, which favors the defender rather than the attacker. This story is a composite of various recent personal experiences as well as expert reports and the testimony of others who have travelled to the front lines of freedom in Ukraine. This is a drone story. Amid an apparent industrial wasteland, a post-apocalyptic landscape of abandoned Soviet structures, collapsing and crumbling, we visited a command post, concealed and protected by layers of concrete. This is the shaft of a spear in what represents a new type of warfare. The tip of the spear are myriad drones hovering above the battlefield, scouring the pock-marked fields, tree lines, and scrub for targets. Brave drone operators work through the day and night much closer to the front to seek out movement, advancing armour, vehicles, and fragile human bodies. Monitoring drones cover every inch of this sector of the front. One assumes that such bases exist to service other sectors of the vast front line, covering more than 1,000 kilometres. Can anything slip through the unfaltering gaze? A rabbit? Probably. A dog? Likely not. Russian armour and fragile Russian conscript bodies? Well, definitely not. They will all be identified, located, targeted. The base in question has multiple rooms whose purposes are not explained, but there are screens, many banks of large screens. Here the war plays out in real time, a tile of feeds from eyes in the sky, 16, 32, and more. You can click on an individual tile to make it full size, so it takes up the entirety of the screen. Now the war unfolds in clear and unforgiving detail. It's not glorious. It's not purposeful. It's not heroic. Rather, the brief forays of vehicles and men into the kill zone rarely lasts more than a few minutes. Suddenly, a vehicle is seen. It speeds across the fields, churning up the grass to reveal the rich black soil beneath, evidence of its moment in the limelight, evidence that for a few brief moments it had momentum, movement, some kind of orders to follow, no matter how inexplicable they are, no matter how senseless the mission, no matter how inevitable the end. Ukrainian defences are probed. Was anything learned? It seems difficult to understand the strategy, the purpose of this movement into danger, and the hasty retreat to try and find cover again. The vehicle is, of course, targeted. A bomblet hits the armoured vehicle, scattering the small figures that clung to its roof. They stagger or run pell-mell in all directions. The smoking vehicle slams into reverse, meandering along the same churned-up lines in a field it had advanced along just a few moments ago. One of the small figures is crushed by the erratically retreating vehicle. Other drones are taking out the running, stumbling figures one by one. All succumb, blown into stillness like small rag dolls, or smashed into unnatural patterns of contorted, scattered limbs. Little smears of khaki on the landscape with raw, red stumps. The vehicle tries to take shelter in some partly wooded area, as if salvation can be found there, but it is tracked, followed, and blown apart. The power of remote drone warfare is relentless and remorseless. The Russians' short-lived scurrying journeys senseless, and their outcome inevitable. It's all captured by these screens. It's not sanitized for social media or selectively released days later with an upbeat techno soundtrack added. This is death in real time. The pockmarked landscape with bomb craters and churned up fields, so reminiscent of the First World War, creating a terrible dissonance because this is a high-tech imperial war of the 21st century. But there is no sense at all that this is a computer game. Watching it unfold, we are acutely aware that here is dying, trauma, and catastrophic injury playing out upon the screens. It's not sanitized, it's not entertaining, it's not kind, it's not nice. It's necessary and important, but having this distance from the catastrophic and senseless death, this electronic remoteness, is not actually distancing at all. Quite the reverse. Here is death and mutilation, and you feel yourself to be in those fields, in the trenches as it unfolds. And it's magnified all across the little tiles. Sanctioned murder playing out across a number of tiny windows in real time, day and night, week in, week out, for 3 years. This is just one sector of the front, one snapshot of time, 16 tiny scenes of horror unfolding, 32 tiny screens, 64, 128, and so on, all happening in parallel, all happening at the same time. We speak to the people operating this industrialized machine of death. The question bursts forth, how do you cope? The commander explains the trick is to kill without becoming a killer. Think rather of family. Think of the lives saved, not taken. Think of your home city. Think of your pets. Anything to make the equation balance in favor of life and not death. Think of Butcher. Think of all the catastrophes that Russia has wrought on Ukraine. Be a creator of opportunities for life, not a destroyer of life, at least on balance. An emotional equation is required to preserve the sanity of the people working in this environment. In the zone, we experience the proximity of drones, friendly or hostile. It's impossible to say. We're in a car, the machine in the car beeps. One beep means drones are in the vicinity. Two beeps, and you reach for helmet and protective clothing. Three beeps, and the vehicle comes to a screeching halt, and you dash out of it to take cover. But if hostile, the drone will likely target the higher value object, in this case, the vehicle. But don't head into the verges or the fields, as they may be mined. Fortunately, we only hear two beeps over and over and over, so can continue to the destination. We speak to volunteer medics. 50 to 70% of all injuries on the front amongst military and indeed civilians are now apparently drone related. Thank you to the experts and witnesses that contributed to this account of a journey near the front. Journeys that brave volunteers and Ukrainian residents of frontline towns take daily. Russia seems to be banking on an assumption that the US will not provide further military aid to Ukraine, Barros explained. Without continued aid, Moscow's untenable casualty rates will reduce and allow it to keep its war up even longer. But, he adds, the centre of gravity for this war is the continued international support for Ukraine. There will be a military solution to the conflict. It just depends on, will it be a Russian victory in some form, or will it be a Ukrainian victory? And it seems from his comment that almost entirely depends on how much international support is provided to Ukraine as opposed to Russia. With time and resources not in Russia's favour, Barros warns the White House against cutting a quick deal over an optimal one with Moscow. Trump can extract them the best deal if he lightens up a little bit on the timeline that he imposed on himself, says Barros, of ending the war within 100 days of inauguration. There's really no reason why you couldn't say, we're going to end this thing, but we're going to end it on the maximum best terms, and that includes letting Russia mature in the vice they put themselves in. And it seems from those who have witnessed the evolution of drone warfare, the development of Ukrainian skill and the reorganization of their battalion structure, their leadership structure, and the integration of new technologies into that, it certainly seems that the center of gravity is shifting in Ukraine's favor. All allies have to do is stick with them and give them all that they need to finish the job.